So you were just talking about short lifespan. So what does this film have to say to us on the subjects of loss and death and grief?
Well, there is a quote in there. You got it written down there.
Yeah. If you could see your whole life from start to finish, would you change things?
To me, that's kind of the same question or the quote, it's better to have loved than lost than to never have loved at all. And some people say, well, no, it's not. If you knew you're going to be hurt, you wouldn't go through it. And yet, for some people, it's like, well, I get these moments, even though it hurts at the end. I grew and I changed. And we see that the parallels with Louise. She knows that her daughter is going to die. And then also Abbott must know that he's going to die. He or they are going to die.
Abbott being one of the heptapods.
One of the heptapods, yeah, who dies in the film. And if you think, Abbott must have known something greater was going to happen, so he had to take one for the team. I keep saying he because I'm thinking of
the actual Abbott.
The actual Abbott. So I'm
right.
I may be misgendering.
Of Abbott and Costello. So
Abbott
sure.
and Costello. And it's kind of as I believe it's said somewhere in there that as she understands their language more, it opens up that time isn't linear, space isn't linear, and so I'm thinking, with her new understanding of the language, maybe she understands that something bigger is at work there, that the whole process, even with the death and the loss, it was still for a reason, a greater purpose. The implication is that it elevates humanity, having this contact with the aliens.
Now, if only the heptapods had time to teach humanity about how gender is a human construct.
I would love to know about that. Yes, I would love to know about that.
Yeah, I'm really curious. We don't know anything about that with their... They're like, well, we weren't here for a biology lesson.
Yeah.
We're here for linguistics only.
Yeah.
Biology is with the next ship.
We're going to help you not kill each other or us.
Yeah.
And help us in the future.
What you were saying about, if you could see your whole life, what would you change? I think if you can see your entire life, then you are in a much better position to judge if the pain is worth, what comes of the pain, if it is redeeming or not. Because we that whole idea of better to have loved and lost, that comes very much from a linear perspective of, if I'm going to go through this pain, I don't know yet if it's going to be redeemed. I don't know if it's going to be worth it. So that's something. In terms of death and loss, I feel like the great themes of death and loss in our arts tend to have to do with mortality versus immortality. Like if you could live forever, then you would transcend death or loss or things like that. Even though if you look at a lot of vampire fiction and stuff, it actually leads to a lot of pain and a lot of death and loss as you lose others that are mortal. But I thought in this movie we had kind of a parallel look, not immortality, but the ability to travel back and forth within the bubble of your life. And that was like, you don't have to be immortal to, in a sense, be immortal. You just have to transcend the linear nature of time. Yeah. And immortality is kind of, it's pinned within the linear nature of time. It's like, if time is going to go on and be linear, can I live through all of it? Not, can I go back and keep recircling back through my life and re-experiencing it?
And it was telling to me in that moment at the end when she hugs Ian and knows what all is coming, and she says, I forgot how good it felt to be in your arms, something like that. And it's like, for her, it seems like she's experiencing everything at once. I mean, you see her switching back and forth and how disorienting it is. Yeah. And I think for her, and she says it definitely is worth it, even knowing what would happen. And I think with her daughter, I was thinking of it as I was watching it. It struck me the first time. And then again, really, knowing she would lose her daughter, but she also had all these years with her. And to me, I think, as a parent, that would be like the worst nightmare, losing your child. But could I ever say, I would never have wanted any of my children not to be born because I would lose them. We all eventually die, or however you want to look at it. Some people, believe we're going to come back in another life. We talked about that cycle of birth, death and renewal,
Yes.
it's all through nature and so many things with religion and spirituality. That whole linear, getting back to the circles and the symbolism of circles. And to me, that's what I think, I can see where she would say that. She got so much joy out of having Hannah.
Yes.
And being her mother, that it was worth the pain. And on the flip side, for him, it wasn't. Because she told him, and then he ended up leaving.
That brings to mind one of the visual cues between Luis and Ian that I didn't touch on earlier. When they're first entering the ship and like they're adjusting to the new gravity in the weird wonky entrance hall, Luis, after the commander gives her a little shove to help her out, is just floating up and gets caught by the other crew members. But when Ian jumps up, he just face plants.
Yeah, that's true. He did. Yeah.
That might, well be symbolic of how adept they are at dealing with nonlinear time. That's a great point. Yeah.
And I wonder, in his case, would it be harder for him to deal with, because he's a mathematician?
Probably.
Oh, yeah.
Very much a linear sort of discipline. We literally have number lines, and would that be harder for him?
Yeah, the hard sciences are more rigid in many ways. So yeah. And even problem solving within them, it's a less, I don't want to say less intuitive, but a less creative process in many ways.
I mean, to his way of thinking, it was probably like, you knew our daughter would have this rare disease, and you didn't do anything, from a scientific point of view, that's highly irresponsible.
What could she have done?
Yeah, it wasn't clear what she had and whether there was anything to be done.
Well, and whereas she seems to be happy moving back and forth through time within Hannah's life, and we see at the end of the movie, it's like after she crosses the barrier, the linearity of the movie becomes unhinged, and we start moving back and forth. Like we have the scene with the, at the UN with the Chinese man, and that's where the information comes for her back in time to talk about the Mandarin phrase and things like that. And then that takes us all the way back to the beginning of the movie, which we didn't realize was nonlinear, but now we know is. We thought it was the past, but now we're like, it's not just the past, it's the ever-present, the living past. She seems to handle that quite well. She seems to be adroit at moving back and forth through that time stream. Ian, and she has that foreknowledge, but she still moves through. She's still okay with that. Whereas Ian, once she tells him, that's what causes him to leave. He cannot handle the foreknowledge of what will happen. He would perhaps rather not know.
I wonder if part of that too is it gender, because men like to fix things, and women, some things were kind of like, well, we don't always have to fix something, That's the big complaint.
Things
I don't
can
need
just
you to
be.
Fix it. Just let it be.
Yeah.
That
makes sense.
That's something that like could spring from like the difference in like jumping into linguistics a bit here. The most oft needed question for couples: do you want solutions or communication?
Yeah. Do you need to just talk and vent? Yeah. Or do you need solutions? Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times, I don't have tons of understanding about it, but my understanding is a lot of times in like couples counseling and things like that, it's finding that common ground of, are we really here to solve, like what are our goals? Are we here to vent? Are we here to share emotions? Are we here to problem solve? Is it more rational? Is it more emotional? And sometimes you have to go back and forth, where, and now normally it's men that are enculturated to be more rational, although not always, their rationality is not always rational, and women that are enculturated to be more emotional, but it doesn't really matter, who it is or same-sex couple or anything, it's those strategies, right? And we often personify those strategies in gender, but they don't have to be.
Yeah.